Hello, this is Mrs. Bennett, and I wanted to create this video to give you a recap of the first two parts of the story of Beowulf, as I am hoping to kind of fill in the gaps and help you see some of the things that we discuss in class for those of you that are not able to be in class with us, and just kind of give you a recap of some of the highlights. I'm not going to read the whole story for you. You can listen on your online textbook or read that out of the paper textbook. But I just want to hit some of the highlights. I've got my outline over here and some text highlighted in your online textbook so that you can catch some of the most important parts. So the story of Beowulf begins not with the hero Beowulf, but with Grendel, the first antagonist. And it introduces him right away as a powerful monster. Grendel is not human. He is more beast-like. He is perhaps like a werewolf or some other kind of enormous, monstrous creature. And we have a lot of clues in the text that demonstrate how Beowulf behaves. It talks about that he growled. Later in the text, it's going to point out how he moves and how he hunts Hrothgar's people. He stalks them, to use one of our vocab words. So he is not human, and we'll point some of those out later. The beginning also starts with the beginnings of the world. So it introduces Beowulf and that he introduces Grendel, and it introduces how he is unhappy with the music in Harrett Hall, like it said in the background video if you watched that. And then it talks about the beginnings of the earth. And so the story in Anglo-Saxon tradition starts with the creation of the entire earth and then kind of links Hrothgar and his people and Grendel to that. There is an interesting element here, and I've got it highlighted in yellow, and it occurs several times in the poem. And you may have been confused by this when you read it, or you may have just taken it at face value. But if you think back to the background material that we covered before we started reading Beowulf, you may remember that the Anglo-Saxons and the Norsemen, and this story comes out of their tradition, you might remember that they were not Christians. They followed Norse gods and Anglo-Saxon gods. And at this point in history, Christianity had not reached those areas of Europe. And so it's kind of curious then that we have this story that mentions Cain and Abel, and it mentions God and the Almighty, and it's got all these Christian images and background stories. And so I just like to mention here to explain why you're going to find both Anglo-Saxon religious elements and Christian religious elements, that the reason these are here is because these texts were translated and written down by Christian monks during the Middle Ages. So 500, 1,000 years after the story was passed around by the Shopes, by the storytellers orally, and then written down in runic Norse or Old English, they were later translated into a more modern version of English, still not the one we're reading here, but a more modern version of English by Christian monks in a monastery. And so these monks, in addition to copying down the text, would sometimes add their own interpretations. And so as this monk is copying down the story, he's reading about a monster. And he says, and then the people singing songs were singing about the ancient beginnings. So he adds some Christian creation elements, like in the first chapter of Genesis, and the Lord said, "Let there be light." He adds some elements like that. And then when he's trying to explain where a monster would have come from and how a monster could be part of the story, he thinks about a statement in the Bible that when Cain was banished by God, the Almighty drove him out and exiled him, and he split into 1,000 forms of evil. And that is the way that the Bible explains where evil monsters and that sort of thing came from. So the monk is adding these Christian elements for his Christian audience to understand the origins of the story. And so when you see that there are Christian elements in there, but also Anglo-Saxon elements, that is the origin of that. And that is why both elements exist in the story. I'll bring that up again here in just a minute. So then it explains